Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Fries. I'm here with my co-host Nick Olson. I just got back from a great vacation in Vermont. I'd totally recommend going to Vermont in the fall. It was a great time for me, and I'm like, hopefully the Vikings are refreshed and ready for football again after kind of a little bit of a bye week here. Nick, how you doing?
Yeah, bye week was nice. Got some reading in, got some break from football, and then also got like it's so wonderful when the Vikings play in like prime time because then my 1 p.m. I can just do the full red zone in all its glory. Because I'm so used to the Vikings
Yes.
playing in that 1 p.m. slot or noon slot for our Central Time listeners. So yeah, it was awesome. But excited to get back to some Vikings football too.
Yeah,
Nothing so
when you
great
get to
as
watch the
Vermont
entirety
football.
of the witching hour, it's just a magical time. It's just a magical
Exactly.
time.
Yeah, it's a fun time with Scott Hansen. So nice when you get to enjoy that in all its glory. So, but we actually have some Vikings football to talk about now because we've got a Cardinals game Sunday, unfortunately, in that 1 p.m. slash noon slot.
Yes.
So, how do you feel about Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury and a healthy DeAndre Hopkins coming into Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think there's greater potential for variance with the Cardinals than a team that has played the way the Cardinals have played so far, so that concerns me a little bit from the Vikings perspective, right? Like you know, if you look at a team with the Cardinals profile that doesn't have the explosive element that Kyler Murray I think gives you as a quarterback, you know, you think this should be a fairly easy game to win for the Vikings, you know, kind of like we've been playing recently, right? I mean, you look at the Bears game, the Lions game, the Saints game, and the Dolphins game with their backup quarterbacks. Those are all games we think that the Vikings should win. I would say the Cardinals have been playing on caliber with those teams so far this year, so it's a game we would expect the Vikings to win. But as we saw last year when we played the Cardinals, their offense can be really explosive. And an added piece that they have back now is DeAndre Hopkins, right? And that's something that was really kind of holding the Cardinals offense back a little bit. I mean, they went with the all midget offense for a very long time, right? They put Kyler, who, while listed at what, like 5'11 or something, can't be more than like 5'9, just based off of pictures that we've seen of him. Marquise Brown, who's certifiably 5'9 and kind of tells us how tall Kyler is. Greg Dortch is like 5'8. Rondale Moore's like 5'6 or something like that. Just ridiculously small offensive personnel. You know, the biggest guy kind of the eligible receivers was James Conner back there at a whopping 6 feet, right? So it's like, you know, just kind of a midget offense. And Cliff, you know, it's been a constant talking point for years where the Cardinals have started off fast and not doing good, but Cliff doesn't adjust his scheme throughout the year. He kind of runs a lot of vanilla stuff or samey stuff throughout the time and basically expects guys to out athlete their opponents. And it turns out DeAndre Hopkins is still really good at doing that. He played pretty well against the Saints in his first game back. I mean, just getting assimilated into the offense. You know, and Kyler is a special talent who can make special plays. You know, in the games they have won, that Raiders game in particular stands out, right? Where he was just literally the offense was Kyler make people miss for 10 seconds in the backfield and make something happen. And we've seen the Vikings kind of struggle with the mobile quarterback this year and getting that quarterback down and not allowing them to take the 10 seconds that they want to have in the backfield, actually connecting and getting sacks. You know, against Justin Fields and against Jalen Hurts so far this season. So it's definitely a big concern. Like the Cardinals' offense, while I don't think it has cohesive play calling, and I think that's Cliff Kingsbury's fault, and I don't think at its core it's very good, it can be very destructive in a very short period of time, and that's what worries me for the Vikings, who have had problems consistently stopping opposing offenses this year.
Yeah, they're a very unique team, and I think you're right to call out like they're so like hot and cold. Like they'll claw their way back into the Eagles game 1 week, and then
Mm-hmm.
not be able to put up double digits against the Seahawks defense. So like the very next week, so
Yeah.
they're just the potential is there for this to be a very explosive offense. I think Kyler has a lot of that playmaking ability that you look like. He's kind of like the traits of an elite quarterback, except he tries to do too much and doesn't play on time, but he's like
Mm-hmm.
so athletic. He's one of the only quarterbacks. I mean, he's not Lamar Jackson, but he has that caliber of rushing threat to him and just an absolute incredible cannon for an arm, and incredible accuracy. Losing Marquise Brown hurts. They do have Will Anderson now, though, or Robbie Anderson, I'm thinking about thinking too far to the draft right now. Robbie Anderson, who is not good, but he is fast, and and this has been a recurring theme. Like I'm a little concerned. One of these days, these wide receivers that aren't good but are fast, are going to burn us. There's potential for the offense to hurt us. At the same time, I do think Cliff Kingsbury's play calling holds back the passing offense. I think he does a lot of really interesting stuff in the run game. But the passing offense is it's so much stick and it's so much like short stuff that is pretty unimaginative and keeps them from, it keeps their offense stalling. So I have some concerns, I guess, a little bit with how that's going to pan out. But I don't know. I think it's another one of those offenses where it matches up a little trickily with the Vikings. If they want to bring out like Brian Asamoah as a spy for Kyler Murray, this might be the game because you don't want like Jordan Hicks taking bad angles to Kyler Murray when he breaks out. Or Chandon Sullivan or whoever it is, and trying to catch him there. But I don't know. This isn't necessarily an offense that I feel like you need to pressure yourself into playing man defense and blitzing a lot, because I feel like this is another team where, mobile quarterback, they'll probably try and live out of too high the way they have been doing so far, and that's probably the defensive. And I would expect them to come into the game and just try and limit limit the stuff over the top, because even if as talented as Kyler Murray's arm is and as fast as some of these receivers are, it's not quite Tyreek Hill. So at least they've got that going for them.
Yeah, I would definitely agree on that point, and I think with Kyler too, you could start to see him press a little bit and start to make mistakes once he does press. He's not going to be a mistake-free quarterback, and this isn't going to be a mistake-free offense that we're going against. So patience on the defensive end could force him into trying to become a playmaker, and that leads to mistakes. It might, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because it could become very effective, and at the same time, it could totally blow up in your face. I mean, I think we saw that last year with the extended playmaking. He made a number of plays. I remember the touchdown to DeAndre Hopkins in the end zone, where Pat Pete covered it about as good as he could for the initial route stem in that. And then Hopkins just wins on the scramble drill, or there was one right before halftime that turned into a long touchdown. There was a whole litany of plays that Kyler made off script in that game. So it'll really be up to, and this is something we talked about going back to Justin Fields, the rush lane integrity of the defense. I think I might have talked about that with Greg, where it's going to be really important to make sure that you layer your rushes well to contain Kyler in the pocket. And he's not going to be totally containable, right? There are going to be instances where he's going to be able to break the pocket, and we have to make sure those aren't disasters for our defense. We've been good so far at limiting explosive plays from opposing offenses, so I hope we can see that continue in this game. But if we want to flip it over to the other side of the ball, the Vikings came off of a game where they had to play the Miami Dolphins, who went incredibly blitz happy against us. They blitzed over 50% of the time, I believe, in that game, as we talked about in our last episode. And the Dolphins are the second heaviest blitz team in the NFL. They have the second highest percentage behind only the Giants, who are obviously a Wink Martindale defense, right? So they're going to blitz. If they're not the highest blitz percentage in the NFL, something's wrong. But Vance Joseph has been the second happiest blitzing coordinator behind Wink Martindale for as long as he's been in Arizona. They come up with a ton of exotic stuff, kind of similar to the Dolphins. A lot of guys on the surface on the line of scrimmage, a lot of guys coming from depth, just kind of firing missiles off at you everywhere. So it'll be something the Vikings to contend with after they came off of a very poor showing against the blitz against the Miami Dolphins, right? We struggled heavily with stunts. We struggled to get any consistent offense going throughout the game. So that'll be, a big test there. The flip side of that is the Cardinals secondary has not held up like the Dolphins secondary was able to hold up against it. Like traditionally throughout the year, they're one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. They're bottom 5 in EPA per play. They're bottom 5 in DVOA in pass defense. So that's something that's going to, hopefully we're going to be able to exploit their lackluster secondary based off of, the statistics, because when you're blitzing a ton, you're abandoning pieces in the secondary and you're leaving things like Justin Jefferson one-on-one with corners who you might not want going against them. I think Byron Murphy's an okay corner, but I don't know if they have much depth behind that in the cornerback room. And then they've been pretty good on run defense in general. Like they've averaged out to be an average or slightly below average defense despite having a really bad pass defense because they've had a really good run defense. So any additional thoughts on how the Vikings can adjust and attack the Cardinals defense, because we expect to see a similar game plan to what we saw against the Miami Dolphins?
Yeah, this is something we said the Vikings needed to work on going into the bye, because so long as Cousins continues to struggle finding an outlet or finding something hot downfield against the blitz, teams are going to continue to blitz him. And it's not just, the Dolphins did it to great effect, the Lions did it to great effect, the Eagles did it to great effect. And I think you're probably seeing a little bit more. Some of that is because of the matchups, but the Cardinals, like you said, are going to be the most blitz-heavy team the Vikings have seen this year. And the thing is, this is an offense that's designed to exploit middle of the field close coverage, which is the Cardinals like to do. They're not running a lot of cover zero necessarily. I mean, nobody is, but like the Cardinals for under Vance Joseph, they want to be a cover one man type team, man match, and bring, like you said, exotic pressure looks. Not always the exact same thing, but do kind of interesting things with the coverage, and then leave your guys one on one downfield and trust that your blitz can get home before the quarterback can find somebody open. The problem with that is that the Vikings, Justin Jefferson's really good at getting open, and if you're running a cover one blitz, you're not going to be doubling Justin Jefferson. It also means that Thielen and Osborne are going to have one-on-ones, and it's just on Kirk to find them downfield, and on the play calling to be able to anticipate the blitz and know how to attack it. Be able to throw into the blitz or be able to create pick plays or rub routes that downfield that'll allow them to take advantage. So that's the main thing I'll be looking for. I will say, despite the fact that I think it's kind of an effective scheme. I don't think they necessarily have the horses to run it. Like you mentioned, I don't think Byron Murphy is great. The guys behind that, Marco Wilson and what is it, Trayvon Mullen? Is that his name?
The former Raiders corner.
Good.
Yeah.
These are two of the only cornerbacks in the NFL with a worse PFF grade than Shannon Sullivan. Not that PFF grade tells you everything about cornerbacks, but it does tell you that these are guys that are getting picked on and that are granted. And when you're in a scheme that likes to blitz a lot, you're going to get picked on a lot, and your PF grade is probably going to say you're worse than you actually are. But I mean, these guys aren't good, and the fact that they're going to be matched up against the Vikings' weapons, I think, is strong advantage Vikings. And I will say, in years past, this pass rush has been pretty formidable. I think J.J. Watt is starting to slow down. For a while he was, the unanimous defensive player of the year. But injuries have kind of caught up to him. I'm not sure they have. Marcus Golden's another guy, but I'm not really sure. I think pass protection versus at least their front four or their front five, I think, is advantage Vikings as well. So on paper, this is a team that the Vikings should be able to sort of run up the score against at least a little bit. I like the way it matches up, but in reality, with Budda Baker playmaking and Kirk Cousins against the blitz, I can see mistakes being made or opportunities being missed, or like we've seen with the Vikings against the blitz so far, they just kind of don't have solutions to it. It could also be a big game for Dalvin Cook, because anytime you're blitzing, that screws with your gap integrity. So I think they could attack it downfield, but I think when teams want to play the Vikings out of middle field close, and I think that's what Kevin O'Connell would prefer they could do, I think it sets Jefferson and Cousins and Thielen up more than anybody for a big game. So I think that's what they'll try to do, and it's just a matter of, have they worked on the things that the Dolphins at the other teams presented so that they have a better answer for the blitz this time coming into this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally on board with you. I think the answer is clearly to get the ball to the receivers often and early, and just, let your guys who should be better than the competition you're going against win those matchups. And that's how you get the ball. And hopefully you're scoring enough points and able to generate enough consistent offense to beat the Cardinals and prevent any hope of a comeback from that intermittently explosive offense, right? Like, we'll call it, like, hopefully you're able to kind of get out to a lead and force the Cardinals into mistakes as they're pressing on offense, trying to make things happen, as opposed to, letting them stick around and Kyler making a few magical plays at the end to kind of win them again, which is exactly what happened against the Raiders, right? If I remember watching that game, probably on Red Zone actually, but just, it was just a bunch of random stuff that Kyler was able to do to get them the win. So, I think that's primarily going to do it for a Cardinals preview. I think we're kind of both on the same page where we think the Vikings should clearly be favored in this game. We think they're the better team than the Cardinals, but the Cardinals do present a couple specific matchup problems and kind of personnel problems for the Vikings that could lead this to be a more competitive game than maybe the team performances so far have indicated. But with that, since it's the bye week and we don't have, a game to recap, we figured we'd go out and get a mailbag from you guys. So we got a bunch of questions here. We're really excited to dive into it. And we're going to start, we kind of separated it out into two categories where how the Vikings can improve themselves right through coaching throughout the season or schematically. And then obviously it's nearing the trade deadline. We got a bunch of questions about potential trades for players and that sort of thing. So we're going to start off here with the first question from Sam. And his question is, what are the top 3 things you think the team has schemed up or coached up over the bye? Kind of top 3 improvements you want to see from the Minnesota Vikings. So we'll go, we'll just go 3 at a time here. I think, Nick, if you want to go for your 3 and then I'll go for my 3.
Yeah, I kind of hinted at this. I think the first one on offense is I would like to see be better prepared for the blitz, which means I don't think they need to drill new plays, but just training Cousins a little bit to know where to look for the ball. Every single play design is you're either going to be going through your progressions or you're going to be reading the defense and reacting to that. So you look at the safety and say, okay, it's middle of the field close, so therefore I'm going to read the field side of the play and then I'm going to read 1, 2 to 3 or whatever. So I think they need to drill that down a little bit better and have be better prepared for the blitz looks that they're getting and better understand what are the likely answers that are going to, in this game of rock, paper, scissors, are going to beat the blitz. If we kind of know that, paper is coming, let's have the scissors plays drawn up. So that's one. I think the biggest one for me is coverage and just drilling the coverage communications, because I think the number one thing holding this team back is the coverage as a unit, not necessarily any individual player, although there definitely are players who I think we could improve on. But I think it's just as a unit. The confusion you see at the snap, Eric Hendricks and Jordan Hicks, moving around and not, it's not like the Zimmer defenses of old where they would just, instinctively know without even needing to communicate with each other where to line up. Nowadays, you see a lot of confusion in the backfield, guys moving around late, even at the snap. So I think just having a little bit more familiarity with like the Donatel Fangio 101 defense would do a lot, because like I said, how many times have we seen a pass thrown right over a linebacker's head? Eric Kendricks, right past Kendricks' outstretched fingers, that if he were there 1 second earlier, it probably could have been forced an incompletion, or the quarterback would have moved on because he didn't think he could fire it into that window. So that's the biggest one, is just coverage communication. Then the other one I would say is I want to see the offense have better responses for middle of field open looks. I trust very much that this offense can sort of destroy middle of field closed. For listeners who don't know the difference, it's just, is there a safety in the middle of the field? That's middle of the field closed. You can't throw there. It's closed because there's a safety lurking in the middle. Cover 1, cover 3. And middle of the field open is you've got safeties you got 2 high safeties. So you can throw right in the middle of the field between those 2 safeties, but you can't throw to the opposite side. So that's cover 2, cover 6, cover 8, and Fangio Donatel world, and Tampa 2, all those variations. So cover 4 quarters. So the Vikings, I think, are very well set up to exploit middle of the field closed looks, because they like to do the boots, they like to do the play action, a lot of those things, exploit those looks. When it comes to middle of the field open, you have to have a more kind of bespoke way to get your downfield throws. And right now I feel like Kevin O'Connell has schemed up a lot of like just very basic, kind of dink and dunking type plays when it comes to middle of the field open, which is that's kind of why teams do it, is you dedicate more resources into the secondary so that you take away those explosives and they're forced to throw shorter. But I feel like They could do a better job building in intermediate concepts so that they could have a little bit better performance when you're looking against two high looks. So those are the main ones I would look at.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, my first one, I'm gonna go with the coverage, solidification as well. I think that's number one with the bullet in terms of the things we're most concerned about for this football team. I think it's appropriate that both of us have it on this list. Like, I think it's clearly the number one option, and I don't need to go too deep into it because we've harped on this podcast. It seems like every single week, and we did it a little bit again today. But the second one I want to come up with, and this is something I've mentioned earlier in this pod, is rush lane integrity on the defensive side. I think we've allowed too much scrambling, even from somebody like Jared Goff, who's been able to get out of the pocket and kind of make our defenders miss in the backfield. Like, I think this team should have a number more sacks than it actually has with more quality rush lane integrity between the defensive linemen. And and that's something that's obviously at the top of my mind because of Kyler Murray. So, it's something that we should look out for, especially against more mobile quarterbacks. Obviously, we have Josh Allen coming up as well. Taylor Heineke likes to scramble around. I guess we're going to be playing him from Washington. It's just a tour of former Vikings quarterbacks this year is really what it is. Maybe we can get, Case Keenum in the mix somewhere. I forget where he's playing now. It's at the Bills. Oh, he's playing with the Bills. Maybe we can get Josh Allen hurt and we get Case Keenum in the mix. Yeah. So, and then my third option is going to be kind of a more advanced run game counters to when we see those heavy surfaces up front. So this is something Austin Eckler, the Chargers running back, actually talked about. He does a podcast through like Yahoo or something with Matt Harmon. And he talked about one of the issues that they've been seeing in the run game is they've been seeing a ton of 5-man surfaces this year. Obviously, this is something the Vikings present when they're in their base defense, right, with the 3 down linemen in Bullard, Tomlinson, and Phillips, typically, depending on the rotation, obviously. And then Zadarius Smith and Daniil Hunter. That makes it very difficult to run zone against opposing teams. That's something we saw in the Dolphins game where we had an absolutely terrible time running the football until, of course, we ran zone and broke a long 53-yard touchdown to kind of seal the game away. But, you'd rather have more consistent success on the ground necessarily than an individual explosive. So I think the Vikings just having counters to that. And I would say that I think the Vikings have had generally a pretty good run game so far this season. Dalvin Cook's averaging 4.8 yards a carry. His average was pretty good. I think it was in the 4.5 range, which is a solid, rushing offense. He's top 10 or fringe top 10 in DVOA and DYAR and things like those efficiency statistics. So I don't think he's necessarily been bad running the football, or a run game's been bad this year, but it would be nice to see more, power gap scheme stuff like the Seahawks are kind of running over the league with some power gap scheme stuff, or obviously the Cleveland Browns and Patriots are doing it, and they've had wildly successful rushing attacks. Obviously, our offensive line isn't built to run purely that or run that all the time, but I think that sort of stuff can help, and we've talked about it before on this pod, where that can help you with those 5-man surfaces with when every single one of your offensive linemen is covered and you can't really run zone that effectively. So just, counter, trap, power, duo, all that sort of stuff I'd kind of like to see get maybe a little bit more heavily in the mix to our offensive run game. So that was that question. I really like the question because it kind of gave us an open-ended way to talk about what we think about the Vikings, but it did, run a little bit longer for an answer. So the next question, kind of bleeds into something you just talked about. It's from Arch-Skull. How can Kevin O'Connell game script better against the bracket on Justin Jefferson and the man looks the Vikings have struggled against, specifically against Philly and Miami? We saw him turn to bootlegs and play action in Miami, but, when we're down, what can he do about that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different answers to this question because there's a couple different ways the teams have been doubling Jefferson. If it's been a true bracket coverage like what the Lions did, I think you kind of have to just accept that you're not gonna lean on Jefferson in those games. If teams are truly dedicating 2 of their 11 players to a true double team, like cover 1, cover 0 everywhere else, and then a true double team on Justin Jefferson, and you you have to let Thielen and Osborne win their matchups, and Irv Smith win their matchups, and you kind of just have to scheme up better looks for those guys. With the Lions, their solution was, okay, we're going to take Justin Jefferson out of the game. We're going to run true bracket coverage, true double coverage on Jefferson for most of the game. And we're just going to have Armani Oruwariye like mug the crap out of Thielen every single down. And that was the game that Thielen drew like 6 penalties. So ultimately, it kind of worked out because there were times when Thielen got mugged and he didn't get called, and the Vikings were able to stall out. So, ultimately, that was the game Osborne got that game winner on that corner route. But I feel like Thielen and Osborne, the rumors of their demise has been a little over exaggerated. I went back and watched a little bit more of their tape over the bye week, and I feel like Thielen is still uncovering very well, especially in plays when he's not getting aggressive press man coverage that turns into hands fighting throughout the entire route. If players are playing off Thielen, he's getting open, and even if he's not getting wide open, he's getting leverage. That's something Thielen's always done really well. Is he will establish leverage and get to the quarterback where he needs to be, and so sometimes it'll be tighter window throws, but I think Cousins has to be a little more aggressive, pulling it in there when it's a tighter window throw. I don't think though that you're necessarily going to see a lot of true bracket coverage. I think what you're going to see more of, and what we've probably seen a little bit more of, is just sort of variations of having a safety shaded over the top. This is what the Eagles primarily did. The Eagles did run true bracket coverage on Jefferson on some downs, mostly third downs, but for the most part, it was what Fangio would call Zeus, which is you kind of run cover two to the double player side, so you kind of have that half safety helping out. Or if they're in the slot, technically it's quarters across the field. But if the player trying to double is in the nickel, then you have the nickel play the quarter flat, and you have the safety play the quarter on top of him, so you get a double team either way. It's kind of it's a neat little Fangio specific variation of double teams. And in those ones, there are routes you can do like attack the pass off area, but you're probably better off attacking like if it's quarters, running a vertical route on the other side of the field or running a comeback route on the other side of the field. So it depends on basically how teams are trying to attack it. And I think there are scheme answers for every single one of these. And then there's, do you have the actual horses to win these routes one-on-one? I think the main thing is, yes, Thielen and Osborne, mostly Thielen, are good enough to win one-on-one matchups. But Kevin O'Connell has to have the right answers ready so that, like I said, a lot of it is rock, paper, scissors. If they're going to double Justin Jefferson, there's a counter to that. You just need to be able to recognize it on time during the game, which is very hard to do, but be able to recognize what the defense's game plan is, and just come in and have sort of the right answer, the right counter to it ready, so that once you start seeing it, you can start saying, oh, they're running true double, they're running a true, cover one double Justin Jefferson, cover one double 18 or whatever. Okay, that means we can run, a slant flat to the other side and, beat the man coverage there and spring somebody way open, or whatever the answer is. So it depends on long-winded way of saying it depends on how they're doubling him, but yeah, there are a lot of different ways you can attack it.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally on board with what you're saying there. I think just one thing to pull out of that is talking about, having the response to what the opponent is doing and going to that quickly, I think is something that we didn't see in the Philadelphia game. And I think we saw a lot better in the Detroit game, by contrast, where we were willing to go to that secondary option quickly. I do agree with you on Adam Thielen. I think he's actually playing pretty well. I think he is creating leverage and late separation. Like you said, he's not creating significant separation to where somebody, can take the all-22 and just draw circles around Adam Thielen and how open he is all the time. But he has the leverage on players, and he is creating, I would call, NFL windows for Kirk Cousins to deliver him the ball. And I think Kirk needs to pull the trigger on some of those opportunities. And yeah, after that, at some point, you just have to have your guys beat man coverage, right? Like, you can design routes that are good against man coverage, like drag routes across the field, or deep over routes, or, basically routes where guys are running across the field to beat guys in man, or, even with chemistry, back shoulder fades and that sort of thing can kind of help in that. But it's really sometimes you just have to trust your guys to win, and you have to get it to Kirk to where he knows if they're committing a lot of resources to Justin Jefferson early on in the game, maybe we have a failed first drive where they commit a lot of resources. Okay, let's go and try to hit KJ Osborne and Adam Thielen very early on in the game and kind of respond a little bit quicker than we have in some of these games previously. So totally on board there. Brandon at Skull Squatch asks the next question. And it's, why isn't the GOAT CJ Ham getting more touches? In my opinion, it's because Kevin O'Connell doesn't want to embarrass the other teams too badly, so they limit his greatness. Thoughts? First of all, CJ Ham, factually, not getting as many touches. He has 1 rush and 3 receptions on 5 targets, so 4 touches in the first 6 games of the year. He's played 16% of the snaps as opposed to 32% of the snaps last year. So literally half of the snaps, and he had 24 touches last year. He's on pace for something like 12 touches this year. So basically half the production from what we saw last year. And CJ Ham not being on the field correlates to the Vikings not winning. His fewest snaps in a game this year was 3 against the Eagles. So very clearly, when the Vikings play CJ Ham more, they win more. I mean, I think that's all the evidence we need. He needs to be in on every play, and probably the primary read on most of them. I mean, who is this Justin Jefferson guy anyway? I don't even know what he does here.
Yeah, I mean, there was that double screen play, just beautiful play design where they had a screen and 2 guys both in the flat, and Dalvin Cook and CJ Ham both there, and they threw it to CJ Ham instead of Dalvin Cook. You want to get the ball in the hands of your best playmakers. What happens? CJ Ham catches it behind the line of scrimmage, makes 2 guys miss, and then gets contact about 10 yards downfield and drags the guys for like another 3 or 4 yards after contact. So we've seen him win downfield on those wheel routes, those fade routes. We've seen him high point the ball. So yeah, I agree. You get the ball into the hands of your playmakers, good things happen. So let's get more more targets. I almost got through this bit without breaking. I fumbled at the 1 yard line.
Nick Olson orders more ham. That's what the doctor says we need. He's not even a doctor, folks. He's not even a licensed doctor. This is terrible.
Well, technically, I'm a juris doctor. So in academic circles, you can call lawyers doctor. So on that authority, I hereby proclaim, CJ Ham, I need more. We are way off the rails already. Yes. 3 questions in. Okay, so.
Okay, yes. Well, let's see what the next one has in store for us. At Astro Gardner asks, why has the running game design regressed so much? If it's not the line, or it's not the line's been better this year, so which coach is dropping the ball? I kind of hinted on this earlier, but I don't think the running game design has actually been all that bad this year. I think we've done a pretty good job executing what we've done. I mean, I think we've seen a lack of explosive plays, excepting that one, large Dalvin run last week. Obviously, Dalvin, I mentioned earlier, Dalvin has 4.8 yards per attempt on the season. That's tied for the second highest of his career. Alex Madison looks a little worse, but he was looking pretty good through the first 3 games, and he doesn't get a whole lot of touches. So, and yards per attempt isn't like a totally great metric either. Dalvin Cook's, top 12 in rushing DVOA, that sort of thing. So, he's been pretty effective. I wouldn't say the Vikings have been a phenomenal run game, but they've been a solid run game so far. I think the Dolphins game may be coloring this a little bit, right? Because we had such a terrible game against the Dolphins, accepting that 53-yard run. I also think that the Vikings' lack of explosive plays, where we've just barely missed so often, has, been, probably, when you don't see the explosive play, that's probably when you think the run game isn't doing so well. I will say, again, flavoring a little bit more stuff to combat those 5-man surfaces, like I talked about in the previous section, is something I'd like to add here. But anything from you, Nick, because I kind of have talked about this a little bit already.
Yeah, I was talking about this the other day, kind of with like Luke Braun, friend of the pod, Locked On Vikings, because Mina Kimes has been studying the Vikings, and she, Mina Kimes of ESPN, and she was sort of wondering out loud why the Vikings boot game sucked now. Or not that it sucked, but like it used to be like the most explosive in the NFL, and now it's below average in explosiveness, and the yards per attempt are down. And I think you can overthink it and think like, oh, are the play designs way different, and is Kirk Cousins doing something differently? And I don't. I think the main thing is like, when Stefanski came along and revived the Gary Kubiak boot wide zone offense, like it was still offenses weren't seeing it every week, and it was still kind of new. But by now, everybody and their mother is running some variant of a Shanahan McVay. Like even the teams that aren't like wide zony and aren't from the Shanahan Kubiak tree are borrowing those elements into their offense. And so teams just got really good at defending the boot, and they know like even if they're running a lot more middle of the field open, which allows you to cover the boot better. But also, even when it's middle of the field closed, guys know like, oh, they didn't hand the ball off. Oh, he's rolling out. Oh, I got to robot back and find the intermediate crosser and take that away. Or as a safety, I got to come down and drive down on this on the cross or whatever. So. In the same way that defenses have just kind of learned how to defend a boot 3-level flood, like the kind of the go-to concept on those play action rollouts, teams also learned like, oh, wide zone, mid zone, a good way to beat it. Those 5-man surfaces, bare fronts. Let's muck up the interior run gaps so that they can't. There's nothing to cut back into, and the guys who have to make those reach blocks, let's make it really hard for them. And let's allow our linebackers sort of to run around free and be able to flow to the ball really fast. So I feel like it's a good point to bring up because you look at like, oh man, like the Vikings are grading so well. Like they have actually the fourth best team run blocking grade right now. And they have the 10th best running grade from Madison and from Dalvin Cook. And you could say like, oh well, Dalvin is no longer quite as explosive as he was like when he was first coming out of Florida State. And there's probably some truth to that. But I also think like Dalvin still looks really well. I don't think that's necessarily it. I think the main thing is just teams are smarter about defending mid zone, and it's forcing teams like the Vikings. And here's where I'll put some blame on the Vikings coaching staff. I feel like they still haven't quite found their second pitch quite yet. They
Mm-hmm.
want to be a mid zone team, but they haven't quite figured out like for McVay, his second pitch is duo, and when they don't do the mid zone stuff for McVay, it's duo, and that's kind of the identity. That's their second play. Stefanski likes to run like a lot of like GT counter or like power. He'll mix out a lot of those pulling players. The Vikings they do a lot of inside zone, but they'll also they like to go to that G counter I call it, or like the long trap where you have the guard pulling, but there's a counter step in it. But they also do duo, and they also do a lot of different things. They do pin pull sweeps. So I feel like they're still kind of finding their identity and figuring out what's their second best pitch to go to. So and when you're trying to like filter through a lot of different answers, ultimately it kind of if you don't have a second pitch, you have like 5 second pitches, then you don't have a second pitch, and the execution isn't as good. So they're still a very good wide zone, mid zone team, as we saw from that 53-yard from Dalvin against Miami. But I feel like the execution is a little bit off because they haven't quite figured out how exactly which will be their go-to plan once they're looking at those odd fronts, those bare fronts, those things that are designed to take away the wide zone. So they're still learning on the counter punch, I think.
No, that's a really good analogy, and I think for it because it's kind of like being a pass rusher where you need to have a move that wins, and then you need to have a counter off of that move. Like primarily, you need to have one move you're really really good at, and you need a counter. And having a bunch of other pass rush moves are nice tools to add to your toolbox. But if we haven't found that counter yet in the running game, and we're just kind of trying to throw a bunch of random stuff out there that we don't know if we can consistently go back to, it's that's kind of somewhere where we need to get on the rushing offense. I agree. So the next question comes from and we'll move on here. The next question comes from Pastel Onion, which is, why is our offense, which is supposed to be mirroring the Rams offense of the recent past, so lacking in explosive plays in both rushing and passing? So I looked up a couple stats here. The Vikings are 30th, so third from last in plays of 20 plus yards, only ahead of, ironically, the Rams, who are also atrocious, and the Giants. Now that's a volume stat, right? So we've played one fewer game than most of the leagues, but still we only have 16 plays of 20 plus yards. However, we're 7th in first down rate in passing and 16th in first down rate on rushing. So that's just the percentage of plays that go for a first down. So we're getting a lot of chunk intermediate gains, but not getting those long gains. I think that also shows with drive success rate, which is a Football Outsider stat, which basically tracks how often a drive gets another set of downs. Which were 10. There's a little bit more to it than that. Ben Baldwin also has a stat for how often a team gets a first down on varying sets of downs, and the Vikings are, I believe, still top 10 overall. The Dolphins game might have tanked it a little bit because of how many 3-and-outs we had, but still top 10 overall in that statistic. So we're good at consistently moving the chains or getting the chains moving. It's just we're lacking the explosive plays overall. Nick, any thoughts as to why?
I think the main thing is, like I said, teams are playing a lot more middle of the field open against the Vikings, so a lot more too high safety looks, which is forcing more checkdowns or plays to the flat or shorter depth of target basically for Kirk Cousins. And the Vikings aren't really able. The idea is if you're doing those, you're running routes to clear space for them upfield. But I think they're not really making the most of their yak opportunities. I think the screen game is still very much a work in progress. There have been some good ones, but a lot more bad ones that kind of stick out in my mind. Plays that the boot game comes to mind a lot, where they're throwing it to like Johnny Munt in the flat, or they're throwing it to C.J. Ham, or they're throwing it to some tight end, some backup tight end in the flat, and that tight end isn't able to make the first guy miss, or the defender is really able to key in on it, click and close very fast, and make a tackle near the line of scrimmage. So I feel like the lack of 20-plus yard explosives, that's mostly just due to the way that the defenses are playing the Vikings now. And the things that got you explosives back in the days when everybody played cover 3 against the Vikings, and the NFL in general was all in the Seattle Legion of Boom. That paradigm is no longer that's no longer the meta of the NFL defenses. So that takes away some of the 20-yard explosives, and why the passing yardage in general is down. Well, it's down across the league, but I think specifically for the Vikings, it kind of has to do with, one, Kirk being maybe a little conservative, maybe a little quick to take the safe route underneath rather than forcing it to the guy over the top, but also not the yards after the catch opportunity not being those opportunities not being taken advantage of.
Yeah, I think, I don't have too much to add here. Just to reiterate, most of the league has proliferated not only the Shanahan-McVay offensive tree, but also the Vic Fangio or quarters, cover 2, middle of the field open defensive tree. So the Vikings are running the offensive scheme that the defensive scheme that's proliferated around the league is kind of designed to stop, or designed to limit a little bit. So I think that's been that. Obviously, there's been a general philosophy of defensive shift where teams are staying in too high more. The Vikings are the most pristine example of this, where we, very, very rarely put our safeties in the box. But a lot of teams are saying, you know what, screw the run. We're not too worried about the run. And even when they're saying screw the run, they mean we'll let you run for 4 or 5 yards a carry. We're not too concerned about that. But those safeties deep help limit the truly explosive, like, Adrian Peterson back in 2012, where teams were loading the box to stop him. And all of a sudden he gets through the 8-man box, and now there's literally nobody to tackle him for 80 yards, right? So we don't really have that meta in the NFL right now, right, where teams are more willing to take the 5-6 yard runs that maybe turn into a 10-yard gain, but limit the massively explosive plays in both the passing game and the rushing game. So the next question from Brownie and Notion is, why has the team struggled in the third quarter? What mid-game adjustments would you like to see?
I'm tempted to sort of say, like, well, teams come out of the third quarter and they see the Vikings game plan and they adjust to it very well, and it takes a while for Kevin O'Connell to adjust to the adjustments. But I'm not actually sure I've seen that necessarily. This is an unsatisfying answer, but I think the third quarter stuff is just noise. I think it's just I don't think there's anything particular to the third quarter. Matt, let me know if you disagree, but I kind of think it's noise. I would be surprised if this trend stayed the case for the next 6 games, same way it did for the first 6.
Honestly, I'm totally on board with you. So it's maybe a little bit of a disappointing answer, because I was like, I was probably just gonna be like, yeah, I think this is just noise. Like, I don't think there's anything schematically we're really doing different. I think we have had the ball in the first quarter a couple times, so I don't know exactly what the stats are in terms of points we've scored or how successful we've been or yards we've gotten in the third quarter. But I think we've taken the ball at the beginning of the game a couple more times, so that might be driving a little bit of it. I do think, defensively, we've actually gotten better, I believe, in the second half and in the third quarter in particular. Like, we've had a lot more issues in the first half. But on the offensive side of the ball, I think it's just continuing to develop across the course of the game. Something we've talked about earlier, with when teams are bracketing Adam Thielen or bracketing Justin Jefferson, maybe going to those secondary options earlier could be part of the issue there. So if we move on to a question we got from the DMs, I've noticed multiple instances the Vikings have come out in empty stats on third and fourth down, or third and fourth and short scenarios. So third and fourth and short specifically. Obviously, if you've got a mobile quarterback, there's still the threat of the run to constrain the defense. But, we're not really keeping them honest with Kirk Cousins back there. So the defense in those cases can solely commit to a pass. Is there a particular benefit to doing, going out into empty that this person's missing?
I think the main one you see, and probably the main reason the Vikings have been doing this, is a great question, by the way, is that when you check into empty, one, it gives you a very clear man zone read. And a lot of times the Vikings will start out Dalvin Cook and then they'll motion him out. And that can give you a very clear man zone read. You don't necessarily need to do it. Like if you come out and Dalvin Cook lines up as the number one receiver in a 3-by-2 set, and they have a linebacker lined up against them, you can probably tell that it's some variation of a man match. But I think the main reason you do this is teams often have a very specific check that they check into when a team checks into empty. So that allows, if Kevin O'Connell, the idea on third and fourth down is you just want to convert. And one of the best ways to do it is to say, instead of saying the defense could be running any of these 100 plays, they're going to check into cover 3, and we're going to be able to establish leverage on the number 3 route, and we'll run stick, and if the guy's open, we'll hit this guy, and if not, we'll hit this other guy, but we know exactly what they're going to be doing. So essentially, I think that's the main reason you do it. And we've seen actually teams do this against the Vikings. This is kind of what McVay did back in 2018. He was able to sort of check the Vikings into cover 3 by the way he was lining things up, and he was able to scheme Anthony Barr onto Cooper Kupp in the slot. So I think that's the main reason you do it. Is if you know exactly what the defense is doing, it's very easy to scheme up a layup for your offense that is maybe even more likely to succeed than just handing the ball off to CJ Ham or Dalvin Cook in a short yard situation. So I think that's the main reason they do it.
Yeah, Nick, you stole my answer. You copied off of my notes. So I really don't have anything to add because that was exactly my answer. Teams go into certain checks when an opponent goes into empty. If you know those tendencies, you can exploit them with your play calls. And we've been pretty efficient, I think, in those scenarios, actually picking those up. So I'm actually happy with us going into that in those instances. So that kind of does it right here for the, scheme portion of the mailbag, let's call it the coaching portion of the mailbag. And we're going to jump into some fun here. We're nearing the NFL trade deadline. We'll get to some potential trade candidates on the Vikings and then also, who we might be looking to add for this team. So Aaron Eggerich's at Eggy Sports, got to shout out the food name in the Twitter handle there, asks, what are the most likely ways for the team to create cap space heading into the trade deadline? Eric Kendricks extension, Oli Udoh cut, Jonathan Bullard cut, or if he's replaced via a trade. First of all, a couple things on that. Oli Udoh, we should probably mention, was arrested over the weekend for disorderly conduct in Florida. It sounds like he followed a woman into the bathroom, which is not a good thing to be doing at all. Really just, pretty unacceptable behavior if those allegations turn out to be true. Obviously, the Vikings have not cut him to date. They may be letting the legal process play out or waiting for more details before that happens, so we can't really speak too heavily on it at this time. The thing with Udoh and also Jonathan Bullard is they're both getting paid next to nothing. Like, both of them are earning under $1 million. So you really save a very limited amount of money by cutting either of them because you have to add a 53rd player on top of that. And their salary basically cancels out any savings you would have from that. So I'll head those off. An Eric Kendricks extension, is a bit of a question to me. Like, I love Eric Kendricks. I'm probably the foremost Eric Kendricks supporter that there is, honestly. Like, I'm a huge fan of him, but I don't love paying, a 30 plus player who is past his peak, right? He hasn't played up to the all pro level that he showed a couple years ago. Even if I think he's still playing at a high level, it's not worth a top of the market extension. Kind of similar, we'll probably end up, if it happens, it'll probably end up looking similar to the Harrison Smith extension, just for a linebacker. And that I don't think is going to age well either. So I don't love doing that. But Kendricks and Dalvin Cook have the highest base salaries on the team right now. To me, the most palatable extension is Brian O'Neill. He has $4.4 million in base salary, and that'd be a signing bonus conversion rather than an extension. You can convert, like $3.5 million of that frees up $1 million in cap space. So you're not making a lot of money. Like, it's very difficult for the Vikings to create money in season right now to make a major trade for a major piece that they have to pay a lot of money.
Yeah, and there's a couple. Those are the correct answers. Like Dalvin Tomlinson. He's got $4 million, I think, in salary, but he's technically he's got dead cap, so I think he's a free agent next year because his contract will void. Kirk Cousins. I mean, you could. He's got a $5 million base salary left that you could prorate out and save $2.5 million, but you're really losing any of the limited optionality there. I guess you could do more than that because he's got some void years there. So I guess you would stretch it down to, what is that, 175, 1.75 million over 4 years or whatever. So you'd save 3.25 million if you converted his salary to bonus. I guess you couldn't convert his entire salary. So you convert 4 million of it to bonus, save yourself 3 million and keep him on like a $1 million minimum salary. But you don't really want to do it with players like Cousins or with Dalvin Cook or with some of these older players who are going to be free agents soon, or you're putting money into void years, or you're losing some of the optionality to move on. Like, for example, Dalvin Cook, you don't want to necessarily do, even if Dalvin Cook isn't the running back next year, you don't want to be paying him like $14 million a year. So you want to give yourself some more optionality, even if you want them to stay on the team and you don't want to cut them, because at least you can then go to the bargaining table and say, like, look, we're going to cut you because it's going to save you this much money, but let's not do that. Let's find a better alternative. Like, let's pay you $6 million next year instead of you having to find another team or whatever. So it gives you basically some leverage. So yeah, I think O'Neill's probably the best example because he still has a sizable amount of money on his deal. They haven't already borrowed all the cookies from the cookie jar like they have with Danielle Hunter or Eric Kendricks. And he is still fairly young, and he's a Pro Bowl player, so you're not going to cut Brian O'Neill unless something very dramatic happens. So that's probably the main one they go to, and they will need to because Zadarius Smith, every game he plays healthy for, they have to pay him another $300,000 or whatever in roster bonuses or game bonuses. So those are going to start to add up because the initial one was already factored into the cap, but these other ones were not likely to be earned. That means as soon as he plays them, he earns them, and the Vikings get charged for them against the cap. So they are going to have to make some of these moves. But yeah, I think Brian O'Neill is probably the clear one. So yeah, I agree with your analysis there.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. Do the not likely to be earned get added to next year's cap? I think they get added to next year's cap. I could be wrong on that.
I think there's an exception in the CBA. Usually, not likely to be earned bonuses that are earned in the following season are charged against the next year's cap at the end of the year. But per game bonuses that are not likely to be earned, there's a weird exception where they count against the cap right away. So.
Yeah, the NFL salary cap makes a ton of sense and is very easy to follow and understand. But yeah,
you definitely don't need to be a lawyer to follow the loopholes through the loopholes.
Yeah, just another option. Like if we did want to cut people, the expendable players are unfortunately CJ Ham, because as we covered earlier, CJ Ham should be playing every single snap. He should be playing 100% of the snaps. But obviously Kevin O'Connell hates him. So, he would save us. I believe the numbers on over the cap are from the beginning of the year, so he has like a $2 million savings if we end up cutting him. Obviously, that's been prorated through the season, and then you have to subtract out the rest of the season salary for the player you're adding. So maybe it's more like $1 million that we save with CJ Ham, but that's still a decent chunk. And then Ross Blacklock is like the only other player who's making significant money. Obviously, the fact that we traded prior to the season, even if it wasn't a lot to get him, means I think we'll probably keep him on the roster for for the rest of the year, so I don't think that's a very likely option. So the next one, actually, next two questions are from Hudson Pung, and the first one is, where does Alex Madison's value in what is Alex Madison's value in the trade deadline market, and is it, are the Vikings going to look at defensive tackle earlier in the draft last year? And then third of all, he asks about Danielle Hunter. If he's not living up to our expectations at outside linebacker as opposed to defensive end, what do you think we can get for him in a trade? And what do you think we'd be looking at as a Vikings roster without Danielle Hunter?
So for Madison, I would say probably the Vikings would be looking for something in the realm of a fifth. I don't think they're necessarily looking to move him though, because um, Tyson Chandler is got the broken thumb, not necessarily ready to step in. Kenny Nwangwu is not exactly a change of. He's not exactly like a 1B, and so I think they like what Madison brings to the run game. He's got good burst. He's brings some yards after the contact value. Got pretty good footwork. He's got good vision despite some notable errors. So he's a good all-around back, and he's somebody who could be, part of a solid running back by committee. I think so. In terms of what you could get for him, I don't think the Vikings would probably trade him for less than a fourth. But if you just look at the precedents, like James Robinson was traded last week or just a few days ago for a sixth round pick that could become a fifth if he picks up enough yardage as sort of the Brees Hall replacement, I think, for the Jets. So that's one example. They've got the McCaffrey example, but obviously Madison is not Christian McCaffrey. He doesn't have that draft pedigree. Mark Ingram was traded for a seventh in the offseason. Sony Michel, maybe that's what you kind of hope for. The Rams wound up paying a fourth and a sixth for a guy who was ultimately really a backup for them. That's maybe that's kind of what you hope for, is to get a Sony Michel package. But a lot of these guys, DeAndre Hopkins, or DeAndre Washington, Matt Breida, some of these Kenyon Drake, a lot of these guys, you're looking at sixth round picks for most of these backups. And I think Madison is an above average player. I think he's a better player than a lot of those examples I just get. But if you just look at the precedents, you kind of hope for a Sony Michel package in the best case, but you're probably not going to get many offers better than a six. And that includes the fact that he's going to need to get paid soon. He already has a decent amount of wear tread on his tires, and the NFL, as probably the main point, the NFL just doesn't really value running backs right now, and there aren't a lot of teams that are going to give up significant draft capital because Alexander Madison is the missing piece for their Super Bowl run. So I think the Vikings hold on to him.
Yeah. So on Madison, real quick, I mean, I'd be shocked personally if we're able to get more than what the Jags got from James Robinson, right? I think James Robinson's a more proven player than Alex Madison, who has a similar profile, at least in terms of he's not an explosive athlete, right? And Madison's not really an explosive athlete either. So I think guys who you think may be explosive players maybe have a little bit higher ceiling, go for a little bit more. Although that's not really Sony Michel's profile either, but both of those players have had productive individual seasons in the NFL, where Madison's mostly filled in as a backup role for Dalvin Cook. He hasn't had season-long production. And then the next one we'll tackle, are the Vikings going to look at defensive tackle early in the upcoming draft? I don't think the Vikings need to look at defensive tackle. I've seen a little bit of steam, and I think in these questions there's a little bit of steam that the Vikings need to make a move at defensive tackle. I don't see it personally. I think Dalvin Tomlinson and Harrison Phillips are great. I think the depth behind it is a little bit questionable, but I think it's playable depth. I think the Vikings' run defense has been pretty quality, especially given the scheme on defense that we're playing. We're intentionally leaving light boxes across the board the whole time, and we're not getting absolutely dominated by the run. We're a middle of the pack run defense. I think that's a really good result, and I think the defensive tackle play is a large part of that. I would like to see more pass rush from the defensive tackle position. So if there's a good opportunity to get a pass rusher who can come in and be a rotational pass rusher, on day 2 of the draft next year at defensive tackle, I certainly wouldn't mind getting a really good player there. I wouldn't mind getting a defensive tackle, at we're probably looking at picking in the 20s right now, just given the fact that we have a very good chance of making a playoff spot. It's not guaranteed, obviously, but if there's a defensive tackle and he's the best player available on the board right there, and there's not another position in need that we think there are players of that quality, I don't mind drafting a defensive tackle there. But I don't think it's an absolute need where if nobody's available to us, we need to reach for a guy.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is because Dalvin Tomlinson will be a free agent and
Yeah.
they don't have a ton of cap space necessarily, is maybe they need to find maybe it becomes a need if they aren't able to find a way to make Dalvin Tomlinson work. But I do think they'll find a way because he's been their best player on defense and he's worth paying, and he's he's not young, but he's not old yet either. So it's a really good pairing they have with him and Phillips. So um, on Danielle Hunter, I don't think you want to trade him right now because you would be selling low on a player who was once, the best defensive, prospect. You would have 3 years ago you wouldn't have traded Danielle Hunter for 2 first-round picks. These days, I'm not sure you would get 1 first-round pick for Danielle Hunter right now. So I don't really, and you would be getting DJ Wanham coming in with, which as good as Wanham has been, I'm not sure you want to downgrade from Danielle Hunter to DJ Wanham, especially in run defense where I'm not sure Wanham can hold up that much. So, and even if you don't, you want to have, guys ready to go in the rear so that you can keep your pass rushers healthy and on lower snap counts so that they're not killing themselves playing 80% of snaps or something crazy. So, yeah, I don't think, also, maybe part of this is my bias because I having watched all his tape, I think Hunter's playing very well right now, and I feel like he's doing well, and yeah, maybe he's not like he's maybe not on pace to have like 15 sacks, but I think he's playing really well, and I think he's playing at a really high level. So maybe he's not playing at an all-pro level, but I can see him playing as like he's playing well. So I don't see a need to trade him, especially when I wouldn't expect to get a first rounder, and I wouldn't trade Hunter for less than a first rounder right now, and I really wouldn't expect anybody to offer a first rounder for Hunter given the health questions. And I wouldn't say a drop off in play, but I wouldn't be surprised if NFL players, were not, busting down the door to trade for Hunter right now. So I wouldn't move him.
Yeah, so I don't think the Vikings are sellers at the trade deadline, right? I think being 5-1, you can't be a person who's siphoning off assets. So I certainly wouldn't move him at the trade deadline if and we've kind of talked about this on this podcast. Like, we both think Danielle Hunter is playing pretty well despite, I guess, lackluster production so far this season. And that's kind of what people are seeing, on the stat sheet, I think, versus his cost to the Vikings. But even given that, the one thing I guess I could see with being willing to trade Danielle Hunter is if after the season you're engaging him in contract extensions, because you have to remember Danielle Hunter's only under contract through 2023. And he's got a significant cap hit for 2023, but it's not untenable. It's like $18 million. If he wants to get paid as one of the top edge rushers in the NFL, which is the going rate for that is almost $30 million now, and probably just going to go up when Nick Bosa signs a contract extension. I believe he's eligible after this year if he hasn't already signed one. You're going to pay in the high 20s for a top tier edge rusher. If that's the kind of money Danielle Hunter wants, and remember, he made a bit of a fuss, or his agent made a fuss about him wanting to get paid more, and the Vikings moved the contract around, and it didn't actually benefit Danielle Hunter, and he didn't actually get any more money, but they kind of moved the contract around with that big roster bonus at the beginning of this season, and we ended up keeping him. If he wants to get paid and cash in on a big payday, that might be where the team decides to move him after the season if we haven't had a lot of playoff success or something like that. And if he's able to recoup a first round pick, I'd be willing to do the trade at that point if we're going to pivot to going in a different direction with this team. But as far as making the team competitive, I think having Danielle Hunter on the roster makes the team significantly more competitive than without him on the roster. So I'd like to keep him if at all possible, monetary considerations aside, right? So the next question we have from Dinesh Kalyanda Sundar, who asks, in what universe is Kwesi even considering a move from Kirk? Wouldn't that go against everything they've said thus far, and why? There's a corollary question to this prior to this that was asked by @NicholasNFL. which was Aaron Rodgers for Harrison Smith and Adam Thielen. Who says no? Nick, let's respond to the second one first.
Just to be crystal clear, I was joking. I threw that out there as a joke in the Locked On Vikings Discord, and Luke told me to tweet it, and I said, what the heck? I'll throw it out there and see what happens. And here I am, like, it's been 48 hours since I tweeted it, and I still have people in my mentions every 5 minutes telling me what an idiot I am. So I don't know if that makes it a success or not, but look, it's very clearly not a serious tweet. I'm just poking fun at the Packers for being sellers and for everything being a dumpster fire in Green Bay, because it's very rare that I get to point that out. So, but the way you can know that I'm not being serious is because the Packers would incur a dead cap hit of $126 million by trying to move on from Aaron Rodgers right now. $126 million. That's more than half of the entire salary cap of the team. So there's no way possible to do it. Even if you designate it as like a post June 1 move, like there's no way to do it. So no, that's not happening. As far as can they move on from Kirk Cousins? The only way they would do it is if they drafted a quarterback in the first round next year. Otherwise, I see them either extending him or letting his contract play out. Right now, I think it's probably more likely they extend him. I think they're just kind of happy with where Kirk Cousins is. And you look around the NFL right now, look at how many players kind of have fallen off, like Russell Wilson, Ryan Tannehill, Matt Ryan. Kirk Cousins is still a top 10 quarterback right now, and a lot of it is because a lot of the other guys are kind of falling out of place. And yeah, Kirk Cousins isn't as good as Josh Allen right now, but there's still, there's a gulf between Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Kirk Cousins, but there's also a gulf between Kirk Cousins and the Carson Wentzes, or the Zach Wilsons, or the whatever that third, fourth, fifth tier quarterback is. So I feel like the front office probably right now is feeling good about their Kirk Cousins extension. They're probably going to think about doing it some more. That said, if they fall in love with a draft prospect and they are able to make a package to move up for him, maybe I could potentially see them trying to figure out, okay, where does Kirk Cousins want to go? How do we make him waive his no trade clause, and how do we get an off ramp from the Kirk Cousins contract? So that's kind of where I'm at with Kirk.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna address the second part of this question first, and just say, like, the second question was, doesn't moving on from Kirk go against everything they've said and done thus far in Minnesota? I would say, first of all, it does not go against everything they've said thus far. There was the Kwesi quote that came out that basically Kirk Cousins is a very good quarterback, but he's no Tom Brady, or something to that effect. And then Vikings media went wild over that for, a week or something like that, around training camp or something. And then Kwesi very quickly learned that you can't say anything that can possibly could be construed as disparaging to your quarterback, or the media is going to jump on that immediately and talk about it. So obviously they're going to be very positive about him to the media, because literally these trade rumors will drop at the drop of a hat. Remember, the John Gruden is going to trade Derek Carr trade rumors that persisted for years and years and years. It's just something that can cause rifts in relationships and really make it so you can't have that quarterback on the team anymore, and limiting those options is bad for you as a front office. So the front office is going to say time and time again that we're not willing to trade. It just limits your leverage in those situations. So I think that we can't take what they're saying at face value, because they literally have to say with the media landscape that Kirk is their guy, and unequivocally, like, who they're going with moving forward. I think the actions the Vikings have taken have not really set themselves up to need to commit to Kirk Cousins long term. Obviously we did the 1 year extension. That was kind of to make the cap work and build a somewhat competitive team this year, but we didn't really mortgage too many future assets in doing that, right? We've made some small trades here and there to make the roster overall quote unquote better, right? But those have involved future picks, but again, not significant assets, right? Day 3 picks. We're not trading first round picks to try to get the missing piece, or a second round pick to try to get the missing piece to this roster and build a juggernaut with Kirk Cousins or something like that. It's not a move like the Rams did for Von Miller, at the trade deadline last year or something like that. So I think we have given ourselves flexibility to where if we want to do something like draft a quarterback in the first round, that fits in with the plan, and that obviously entails moving on from Kirk Cousins. So and that'll be an evaluation they have to make at the end of the season. I don't think they're planning to do that at this point. I think they like their earlier returns. Obviously, statistically, it hasn't been perfect from Kirk. Like, we haven't seen the performances from Kirk that say unequivocally, yes, the Vikings are going to keep Kirk Cousins, or he's been on a track for them to keep him. But we also haven't, he hasn't shown anything that says they shouldn't necessarily keep him either. So it's kind of been a middle ground where they have options at this point, and the answers are it's kind of open ended questions at this point that haven't been answered, and we'll maybe have more clarity on by the end of the season. So that was a long winded response to saying yes, the Vikings are probably going to be remain open to moving on from Kirk Cousins at some point in the future. So Laser Fours asks, what's the best way to reduce Chandon Sullivan snaps? And then the second question is Jacob Nelson asks, what's the best option to improve nickel defense this season? So I think those are both very pointed questions at Chandon Sullivan. Nick, do we have any options to get a nickel corner in the building? Or what can we do about Chandon Sullivan, who's been one of the worst graded corners by PFF?
Yeah, and Sullivan does some things well. The smart way to do it before Lewis's unfortunate injury would be to play more three safety sets, and even if that means getting Lewis involved as playing basically nickel corner, or Cam Bynum, who was a boundary corner in college, getting one of them in there to play the nickel back. I think that might have been the best way to do it. Nowadays, you're probably looking, maybe the best answer is just to play kind of what the Dolphins were doing, play your base defense, and even if you're matched up against 11 personnel, just bring out Jonathan Bullard and have your boundary corners be Patrick Peterson and Cam Dantzler, and have no nickelback, and just have a heavier front up front. So that probably isn't the best idea, because then you're putting more strain on your linebackers and your safeties. So I don't think that's the best answer. So I think they're kind of stuck with Chandon Sullivan unless they make a move. And there's a few different guys they could get, but Desmond King is probably my preferred trade target right now. I don't think the Texans right now are likely to be buyers at the trade deadline. So I think you could probably get him. His contract is palatable, and I feel like he's maybe the best nickelback who's available on the market. I've seen some other names thrown around there, but Desmond King's my favorite. I don't know if you have another guy that you have kind of have your eye on
Yeah,
that.
one I saw suggested today was K'Wan Williams from the Broncos. The Broncos appear to, honestly, bafflingly to me, be sellers right now. I mean, they went all in on Russell Wilson. I don't think you can sell after 7 games or whatever, but that's their prerogative. And K'Wan Williams was a great nickel corner for a long time with the 49ers. I think that'd be a great addition to the defense as well. But I kind of, I like the way this question is going. I think if it were to me, if I wanted to improve one position at the trade deadline, it can't cost a lot of money, and B, I don't want to spend a ton of resources on it. I think nickel corner is the answer to that, because nickel corners are generally undervalued, I would say, in the NFL, just in terms of the resources that are allocated to them. So, no, I think that's good. And then we're gonna keep this short because we're running a little bit long on this podcast. But at Purple Zato asks, are there any players you'd like the Vikings to target before the trade deadline? Add free agent targets as well. Let's go with, like, you get 3 or 4 names, Nick, and don't take too long.
Desmond King is probably my number one trade target, like I just mentioned. There aren't a lot of other guys that I think the Vikings can afford. Like, more boundary corners would be great. Like, I've seen Vikings fans say, like, should we, Greedy Williams is on the market. Should we trade the Browns for Greedy Williams? And I'm kind of like, I get, like, yeah, Patrick Peterson and Cameron Dancer aren't great, but I like the young depth behind them. I like Andrew Booth, and I like a Caleb Evans, and I don't really want to add another boundary corner to the mix. So if it were somebody, it would be maybe a safety, maybe a nickelback, maybe a pass rusher. But I kind of feel like there aren't a lot of places right now where I feel like they need an injection of talent. My number one guy would actually be still Odell Beckham, and I know a lot of people feel strongly that he's can be a locker room poison, or he's washed, or he isn't the guy that he was in New York, and I think all of those are probably true to some extent. But at the same time, he was a key piece in the Rams Super Bowl run last year, where Kevin O'Connell was his offensive coordinator. So I feel like there's Kevin O'Connell probably more than anybody can vouch for just how much having Odell Beckham as your sort of wide receiver or your Z receiver lined up wide can really transform your offense. And, we talk a lot about how teams are doubling Justin Jefferson. What the heck are we going to do? Yeah, Adam Thielen can separate against the coverage really well, but who's really, really excellent still against separating against one-on-one man coverage, and defenses would be terrified of doing that, is Odell Beckham. So I feel like there's a lot of um, having, in the same way that the Eagles went out and got AJ Brown to add to, everybody else they have there, and now teams are really having a hard time game planning for the Eagles attack. I feel like if you added Odell Beckham, you'd be able to sort of solve the problem of we're doubling Justin Jefferson, and now you got to beat us with your other guys one-on-one. Because if Adam Thielen and Odell Beckham are your other one-on-one guys, I think it could work really well. And the other reason I bring up Odell Beckham is because last year with the Rams, he basically played for vet minimum. It was like a little bit over $1 million, and then he just had contract incentives that kicked in depending on if the Rams won the NFC Championship, the Super Bowl. So they did, and he ended up getting paid $4 million. But I think I'm okay paying Odell Beckham $4 million if it's a vet minimum salary that only becomes $4 million if the Vikings win the Super Bowl. I will happily pay anybody. I will go into Saints cap hell if it means the Vikings win one Super Bowl before I die. So that's why Odell Beckham. So those are kind of the main guys I have my eyes on. I don't have a lot of other names on my list. So who do you have on your list?
Yeah, a couple names I saw, and I guess Darren Wilson reported this, is the Vikings have been asking around about KJ Hamler, a Nick Olson favorite, and also Brandon Cooks.
Famously better than Justin Jefferson in your Nick Olson NFL experts pre-draft rankings. So
Yeah, I mean,
if I can just take a moment to dunk on myself.
Denzel Mims might also be available. Maybe we can trade for KJ and Denzel Mims and Jalen Reagor and have
Speaking of players that I thought were better than Justin Jefferson, so
yeah. And we'd also have Justin Jefferson, which is the best part about all of that. But no, Brandon Cooks I think could be really interesting. You'd probably need the Texans to do something like the Bears did for the Eagles today when they took on all of Robert Quinn's salary basically for the rest of the season in that trade that they made. That obviously also probably comes with increased draft compensation if a team's going to take on that money for you. On top of that, I guess we're just going to hammer the Broncos here at tight end. Albert Okwuegbunam appears to be on the trading block as well. The Vikings' tight end depth on offense is probably their weakest link. Maybe interior offensive line is in competition for that, right? But adding another piece there, and maybe he's on the way out, so he doesn't cost all that much because they've got Greg Dulcich kind of showing out there. So those are names that we kind of like. And for this next one, we're gonna go just kind of yes or no, and then you get one sentence on the answer. So try to keep us rolling along here. Tripu Delops. At this point, I've seen that name for like a million years, and I don't actually know how to pronounce it, Trip. So tell me how I screwed it up. But at this point, would you bring back the following impending free agents? Dalvin Tomlinson, go.
Yes, he's been our best player this year.
Yes, with a bullet. Yep. Patrick Peterson.
Yes, he's still a good player, and he's an above average corner that we're paying $4 million next year. Maybe we'll pay him even less, but I think even if he's your backup, for the coaching, for the cohesiveness, for everything else he brings, veteran leadership, yes.
I'm going to say yes if we can't find any better options, and I don't think there's a very good chance of us finding better options. Like the cornerback market is not great for free agency. Garrett Bradbury.
Depends on the money, but yes.
I'm going to say no because I think somebody's going to pay him way too much. I mean, look at what Pat Elflein got. Look at what Nicky Easton got like 4 years ago. Like teams overpay for interior offensive line.
That's a good point.
Irv Smith.
Would have to be cheap, but I don't think many teams would be willing to pay. I probably wouldn't pay him more than like $5 million, $4 million a year. So that's depending on what you think, but that's yes, I think maybe.
Yeah, yes, if he's cheap, and he's one I think will be more cheap than a Garrett Bradbury type. Alex Madison.
No, I like the depth in Ty Chandler and Kenny Nwangwu.
Same. I don't think we need to invest significant money in it. Somebody will give him a couple million probably. Chris Boyd.
Until somebody else kicks him off the roster, I like him for the special teams value. So maybe he's the 53rd guy, but for now, yes.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to get more than a vet min contract. He doesn't play on defense, so yes, just keep him around for special teams value of vet min. Jacob Nelson back with another question. So you are the Vikings and you have to use your first round pick in a trade before Tuesday. Who's the player you'd want to use on it? One on each side of the ball. And I kind of took this as players who are very good, but not necessarily, guys who are going to garner multiple first round picks, right? So, and I kind of kept this open to the entire league, was willing to trade players as opposed to just players who are on the trade block. So I guess I'll go ahead. On offense, I would say Ryan Kelly, the center for the Colts. I think he's had a bit of a down year this year. He's relatively expensive, but he has been a top tier center in the NFL for a long time. I think it shores up the interior offensive line for the Vikings. It does provide an upgrade from Garrett Bradbury. It does solve the question of what do we do at center long term. And even if it's not like the biggest impact in the world, I think having that signal caller in the center will be a good addition to the Vikings. So on offense, Nick, do you have a guy?
On offense, it would probably be a wide receiver. This is fun, like just burn one of my first round picks, and I would probably go if it's an all in move. It would be one of the Bucks receivers, and if it's an all in move, you go for Mike Evans, and if it's build a dynasty, it's Chris Godwin. They're both exceptional. I think they're both top 10 wide receivers. I think the Bucks are probably going. Maybe they won't admit it, but things are because they might. The state of the NFC South is they might win the division anyway, but clearly this is Tom Brady's last rodeo. So if you are able to pry away one of those wide receivers, I think it probably makes sense for them to start moving on. And I think both of those players, talk about like solving the offensive, like what are we going to do if somebody's doubling Justin Jefferson? Throw to Chris Godwin or Mike Evans is a pretty good solution. So that's what I would do.
All right, hit me with somebody on the defensive side of the ball.
It's tough because you got to find somebody who is on a seller, but I think it would be. I would buy in for Bradley Chubb because I feel like Zadarius. You can never have too many pass rushers, and Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith aren't young, and I feel like he's a player that you get Mike Smith to get his hands on him, he could play really well. So, and he's somebody who I think could. I mean, there are probably better pass rushers out there, but I feel like that's somebody who I'd be willing to buy into and buy into his upside and build around him for the long term. So.
Yeah, and this is something that's probably a little bit expensive, but I would like to add a corner. There are a lot of corners that kind of went through my mind. Somebody I can define as a seller who isn't a Patrick Surtain, who the Broncos would literally never sell, is the Colts again, I think. And Kenny Moore shores up our slot corner. I think that's probably a bit pricey for what Kenny Moore is. Like, if I have to spend a first round pick, that's probably an overpay for Kenny Moore. But he's been one of the most dominant slot corners in the NFL over the past, 5 or so years. So I like the idea of adding him to the team and replacing Chandon Sullivan.
Neither of these teams are going to trade him, but if you want to go crazy, like a Patrick Surtain or a Jair Alexander, yeah, I would absolutely shell out first rounders for those guys. So,
yeah, I mean, obviously, for those guys, you need a Jalen Ramsey level trade package to put together, and I'm not quite willing to do that. And really, you need a Jalen Ramsey level trade package on top of them hating their current team and forcing their way out. So it's really not a realistic kind of thing to do. And the final question we have here in the mailbag, kind of sprinting to the finish here a little bit, is from Zeeb64. Some of the 2022 Vikings are replaced by the Muppets after the bye. Which players/staff get replaced? Which is the least notable swap? And who remains as the token human companion?
So all I can say here with confidence is that Mike Zimmer would be both Statler and Waldorf, the two old guys who just like crack jokes. He's no longer part of the main show, but just the grumpy old guys in the background. So that's I feel very confident that those two Zimmer would take on the reins of that one very well. I feel like Kirk Cousins when you see a Muppets show, they always keep like one or two guys. So I feel like Kirk would probably be the guy, and then the rest of the Muppets would surround him. I don't know if you have good answers for any other Vikings and who their Muppet correspondent is, but
yeah, I don't know. I think Wes Phillips. I just pulled up the Vikings coaching staff. I think Wes Phillips might be the most character looking of the people on the Vikings coaching staff, which I could see him being transformed into a Muppet at that point. And, he's kind of the offensive coordinator with a Kevin O'Connell coach staff. Obviously, he has a lot of roles and responsibilities underneath that, but he's not the most critical part of the team, so I'm totally okay with him being replaced by a Muppet, and maybe we don't notice too much about that. On the team itself, I think very clearly Kirk is the one who stays, right? Because I think his level of corniness and dorkiness would work perfectly well with a Muppets level kind of show, right? Like, let's be honest, Kirk was in theater in high school. He was at least in chorus, and he was probably in theater doing a musical or something, given his what we've seen from his musical prowess. So I think he'd fit well in the Muppets.
I will say Daniil Hunter would make a pretty good animal. They're both freaks in nature, so that matches up. That lines up. So
yeah, all right, there we go. Ending on a little bit of a fun note
we
here
don't
to
have
the
Patrick
mailbag.
Mahomes on our team, so we don't have a perfect Kermit the Frog.
Yes.
Alas.
Yeah, on offense, I would trade a first-round pick for Patrick Mahomes, and then that's all you need to do. That solves all the problems.
Easy peasy. Or failing that, Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, I'm not doing that. Nick's doing that.
Look,
Mob him on Twitter.
As everybody was saying, Tom Brady was washed that last year with the Patriots because he didn't have any weapons. Then he put him in Tampa Bay, give him elite weapons, and all of a sudden he wins another MVP. So I'm just saying. That's what made it a good troll job, is that it was just believable enough to get people to yell at me. So.
Well, and just think, 10 years from now, Aaron Rodgers will probably have stolen money from the state of Wisconsin or something for an ayahuasca retreat, So at the end of the day, the circle will all come full circle on Vikings quarterbacks.
Vikings legend Aaron Rodgers.
Yes.
On that note.
We really need to wrap it up here. So I am Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. He is Nick Olson. You can find him at Nick Olson NFL. Our partner, Gregg Blake, at You've Been Gregged, was not able to make it tonight. At Kindred Skulls is the podcast handle on Twitter. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. And Skull Vikings.
Skull Vikings. Go, baby.
The first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score.